And this is Donald Jeffries coming to you from just outside the swamp-infested Washington, D.C., as we do every Friday at this time. You're listening, watching, I Protest. And we have a great guest today, Salim Mansour, somebody I admire. I'm honored to speak with him. He knows more about world history than anybody I've ever seen. And he's just an esteemed college professor, but I'll let him introduce himself more. He's got quite a resume, and I probably wouldn't do justice to it. So, Salim, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Well, it's such a privilege to be on the show with you. I was looking forward to doing this, and the issues and the circumstances were just right that we connect at this time. Well, for your audience, I'm a retired professor. I was almost for 4 decades professor at Western University or University of Western Ontario, one of the somewhat respectful, or if not premier university in Canada. We are a small country compared to where you are, Dawn. Um, so I was there for, as I said, almost 4 decades. I've been in the university. I retired just about the time when COVID shut down most of what we could do as free people. So that was a good timing for me to retire. And I've been spending my time, apart from reading and scribbling, writing substacks, essays, and trying to be in touch with people in the world, because we are always walking on eggshells, Don. You know that better than I.
Yeah.
And you say something or you write something that doesn't please somebody or your friends, they become former friends, and then you acquire new friends, and then you
Mhm.
step on the eggshells again, and this whole thing is repeated. But at the end of the day, you, I'm speaking here for myself. I try to stick to the principle that I have followed basically all my life. That is to stand as an individual, not as a collective, or not as a part of any party or anything, and hug to the universal principles. So um, that's me. The world of 9/11 brought me into the public affairs because people were looking for somebody of my background, an academic, and so on and so forth, um, to speak about Islam and about the Muslim world. Because overnight, as you will probably know, Don, in America, the people who were Kremlinologists overnight with the collapse of the Soviet Union, they became, sinologists. And then with 9/11, they became Islamologists, so they kept
Yeah,
changing
yeah,
their hat and they
yeah.
keep changing their hat. But it was because of that circumstances I was called in to Washington many a time, and I got to know people and meet people, and then travel, across United States with invitations coming, and same thing in Canada. And then, you know, the COVID period came, and then, with the Donald Trump administration coming in after Obama, things took a wild turn, right, Tom? And here we are. We are in a mess, a total mess. So that, I suppose that's enough I can say.
Yeah, well, you're obviously and again, I'm fascinated by because for people like you who are you were a normie for a long time. I mean, you were academic, presumably doing well, and then you get asked by a lot of impressive people for to I guess for your opinion on things and how to chime in. And at that time, you looked at it the right way. You were warning about the dangers of Islam and terrorism and everything. And so was it COVID that changed? What changed you to the position now where you're speaking to one of the world's foremost thought criminals in me? What happened? What happened to you?
Well, I mean, as I look back, yeah, I mean, we all in some way change, but the change is not fundamental, I would say. I mean, I didn't change anything fundamentally. I have, just let me say, as a North American, I could have become an American. I mean, I came to North America after in my early 20s, 21, 22 years old, as a refugee from a war in South Asia, and it's all been forgotten, because our life is a struggle between memory and forgetting. And forgetting is what happens, We are now forgetting things, what happened last week, event. So there was a genocide in South Asia. I was caught up with that, and my family, friends, everything. This was in Pakistan, India, war, breakup of the country, being a refugee. I was just lucky because I had an aunt, my father's sister, who sponsored me as a refugee, and it was fast tracked, and I came. And I spent a year in America. I came to Canada, and then I went to America with connections, family connection. And I was in California for a year in 1974. Very, very significant year, Don. I mean, you would know that history. Vietnam War was blazing.
Sure.
And then came the Watergate scandal and all of that. So lived through that. And then the 76th, the 200th anniversary, I went to Philadelphia. But the point I'm making is that the love for America around the world, despite all the problem, is the love for the ideals of America. Not the government of America, not the senator of America or the congressman or the president. Some presidents are remarkable, other presidents are as scoundrel as anybody else, who just become president. But it is the ideal of America, and I still treasure and hug and love. I grew up with the poetry, I mean, a Peace Corps volunteer that came to our part of the world, lived with families. And so my family, my father and mother, was a Peace Corps parent of a lovely young man. I still remember him, Bob Burns. He was in his 20s. And I was a kid, around about 10 years old. That was the age when Kennedy died. I was 10, 11 years old. And so the family, friends, and I ended up in California. This gentleman, my family friend of my uncle, my dad, his name was also Donaldson, a Scottish American. He came all the way to Canada and picked me up and took me with him. And we drove. I mean, here am I, 21, 22-year-old. I'm scared to death sitting in his car as we're driving out of, Ontario on the highway, getting into Detroit in a traffic hour. I've never seen an 8-lane highway. I've never seen an 18-wheel truck.
So we're definitely number one in traffic, I think.
Yeah. Someday I want to write about, my life. It's been over 50 years. So I'm a North American. I was telling the other day.
You should probably start doing it on Substack. And I read your Substack, your latest Substack, which is very long and very detailed, very scholarly. But I mean, it looked like you pretty much went through a whole history of everything. But if people want to, make sure you give out your address so people can subscribe to you on Substack too. But what was that about? Because it was very, for an average person reading it, it's really scholarly. But what were you trying to talk about in the Substack?
Well, I read you, Don, and that's when I got to know you. I found you through Leo Rockwell's blog, where you get published. And that was a couple of years ago. And then everything that happened that we meet. But you write about your immediate experiences and so on and so forth. I mean, your Substack article, and I've read your books, so there is your Substack is like the one that you did about Christmas, and that was so beautiful, and I loved it, as I wrote to
Thank
you. But what I am doing in Substack is, as I say, reflection and rumination. That is going back to events and connecting it with our present situation. And you might say it is the first draft of, I hope, will be a book, a collection of essays and so on and so forth. So today's Substack, the issue, the headline is, the title is, Take the Beam Out of Your Eyes. It should be a universal principle. That's the principle I stand on, and the whole argument, I constantly hearing, because of the situation that we're dealing with in the Middle East, in Ukraine, and so on and so forth, the war that is never ending, is, always They are the aggressor. They are the bad guys. They are the ones who started this. In the Arab-Israeli conflict, or the genocide that is going on, it's constantly the Jews are the victim. We came, and the Arab rejected us. They did this. They did that. Well, history didn't begin with your coming to Palestine. And if it did begin with your coming, how did you come? So the other day, I'm listening to the argument. It was on Jimmy Dore show. A Zionist broadcaster is trying to pigeonhole Jimmy Dore with, well, you Americans did genocides. Why are you talking about that? Why are
I
you,
saw that. Yeah.
focused on, and on and on and on. And I'm sitting there and I'm nodding my head. Wonderful. You're referring to, this guy is referring to the genocides that we can say happen and did happen after 1492 when the Spanish arrived. And so, you can go to the whole literature. Las Casas's, first eyewitness report, who came soon after Columbus. And then the whole, Spanish and other Europeans arrive, and Hernando Cortes, and also, that history. But 1776 was not about genocide and war. It was about freedom. That history was over. In that sense, and the 13 colonies, and they rose up against the king, against the British colony, and so on and so forth, and the ideals of America was founded. But you guys, you're talking about now the Jews, Eastern European Jews, Don. You guys didn't come like the people in Columbus, on boats and other things into Palestine.
Right.
If you would have come without the umbrella and the protection of the Anglo-American Empire, then the Arabs would have taken care of you.
Yes,
You would have
exactly.
landed there, you would have had a fight, there would have been an equal fight, and if you could win, then you would say, we win, they fought, they defeated us, we defeated them, and so on. That didn't happen. You came because of the decisions that was made by the great powers of the day, the colonial imperial powers of the day, and nobody was going to fight you, or could fight you. And the entire political system that was created in World War I, that is still there in the Middle East, and we can go into the details. I mean, the granular detail, but these borders, these royal families, these were all implanted by the great powers, the French, the British, and then the Americans. And it is in that construct you guys got the privileged position. The United Nations vote in 1947 was basically a collection of European powers. If you have the vote today, it would be completely different, because the United Nations reflects a completely different world. So, they sit back and they argue. My position is, let's put the thing on the table, learn your history. And then everybody wants justice. You Jews want justice. You Arabs want justice. Everyone wants justice. But you have to get your facts right and listen to each other. That's the taking the beam out of the eyes, because with the beam in your eyes, you are making an accusation against the others. You are totally blind, because you neither see the other, nor do you see yourself in history, in politics, So that's what I laid it out, and laid it out on the basis of Jewish writers who have become conscious of their own history, and who have examined the archives and have come and spoken. And Israel Shahak, who is the main feature in my paper, who died in 2001, was a survivor of Belsen. And he came out of the concentration camp as a young boy, 12, 13 years old. Then he was transported to Palestine under the British mandate. And the rest is history. He becomes a professor. He teaches at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. But he observed, he has served in the army. He observed what is happening. And he says, this is not right. It's a simple golden rule. Thou shalt not do to others what you don't want others to do unto you.
Right.
So then these people have opened up to examine what is the worldview of the modern Jew, of the Israeli. They're examining their own. I've been doing that with Islam because, the whole thing after 9/11 was not to, get into apologetics. Why did this happen? What is the background? What is the structure? What is the theology? What is the philosophy? Who has seized power? And so on and so forth. And there is a convergence in all of this is happening. The convergence of the great powers making use. And I suppose we want to talk about that. I don't want to be in a monologue, but you can see today, I mean, only about 6 weeks ago or 7 weeks ago, Donald Trump had the second in command of Al Qaeda inside the Oval Office, sitting
Yes,
where there have been
yes,
people in Guantanamo Bay who are supposed to be
yeah,
Al Qaeda members, and they have not been put on trial. Just like, what happened to Lee Harvey Oswald. They
yes.
eliminated the principal witness. Now we look back and we're asking question. So how is it the guy who is this al-Shara, who was the deputy leader of Al-Qaeda under Zawahiri, who succeeded Osama bin Laden, and how is he sitting in the Oval Office? It is like
Exactly.
asking, how is a devil or Goering or somebody of the Himmler sitting in the Oval Office talking with President
Right,
Roosevelt or
right.
Truman?
Exactly. Exactly. And that's the problem we have with all this is that, we have it's very much like so many great things came out of Orwell's 1984, but he would point out there all the time that they would constantly change the dynamic. So they were, they Oceania wasn't at war with Eurasia, but then suddenly they would be, and they say Oceania's always been at war with Eurasia. So that's what they do with these kinds of. You go back to, you mentioned Osama bin Laden, he was a CIA asset. So was Saddam Hussein. So these were
Absolutely.
people that were our guys, and then if they again, I don't think any of this stuff happens by accidents, but they suddenly became bad guys like WWE wrestling. And this guy seems the same thing. He was a bad guy in Al Qaeda. Suddenly he's in the White House. And if you even question it, is like, you're shouted down. I mean, there's an inconsistency there. Either terror, first of all, you got to define what terrorism is. And we've talked about this before on RB Ham. I put that up on the screen. Our friend RB Ham, he's going to have you tonight at 9 p.m. on Beyond the Pale on his Rumble channel. So check that out. We always have a great conversation there. But um, when I can't find any evidence for the term terrorist before the state of Israel was created. I think it was a term that was created to go along with that, and it's to explain the natural opposition if you're invading somebody's territory. I mean, did we call the Indians terrorists here when we came? I've never heard them called terrorists. So why do they call the Palestinians, the people that were living on that land, terrorists, and then you demonize them that way instead of saying they're just they're freedom fighters fighting to retain their land. And then you come up with these groups. And how many different groups have we had? Al Qaeda is just one. Alex Jones used to call it Al Qaeda, which is a great name. But you've had the PLO, which was one of the first ones that's long gone, I guess, the Yasser Arafat. And then you had ISIS and ISIL and Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood and the Taliban. There's so many I can't even keep track of them. Are they all the same? Why do they have different names? Are they go? Do they have the same goals? And but it's the only way that Israel can try to get the upper hand. Because if you criticize, like that's what they're doing right now. We're looking at the genocide in Gaza. We're saying, how do you defend that? Well, Hamas. Okay, that's supposed to be the answer to it, right?
Well, this is it, and this is where history and philosophy comes into play. Asking the question, examining the issues, and going back to looking at it impartially. Can we be impartial? Yes, we have to make that effort. So we cannot be judge, jury, and prosecutor all at the same time. And that's what is happening with America. But America is not the first country. That's how has happened with the British, with the French. I mean, Ho Chi Minh was fascinated and completely absorbed with the American Declaration of Independence. These guys were in France. All the top leaders, except for Mao Zedong in China, went to France, like Deng Xiaoping, like Chou Enlai, and all of them. And they studied in France. Same thing, Indochina was part of the French Empire. They went to France. From India, they went to England. They were at Eton and Harrow, and then went to Cambridge and Oxford, all the leaders. I mean, Gandhi, Nehru, Jinnah, just have every one of them. In the case of Vietnam or Indochina, they went to France. France is the homeland of revolution, the first revolution in terms of rights of man, even though the Americans preceded it and the American Constitution comes before that. But the discussions were going on. This is the age of enlightenment. All of these people are the leaders. They embody the principle of enlightenment. That's what I was talking about. Enlightenment, it didn't touch the stettles in Eastern Europe, that closed society. It was in Western Europe. And if you look at the figures of enlightenment, begin with Newton, Hume, Adam Smith, Locke, and so on and so forth. They're all in Western Europe. Kant, Hegel, Leibniz, Montesquieu. So I don't want to run the name. You know that, what I'm alluding to. And this is the fresh new ideas that spread worldwide. And Jefferson is the man of enlightenment. He spends his time in France. He knows everybody, Same with Thomas Paine, who spent his time in France, was in fact arrested in France, because he took a position against Robespierre and others, He got released. That was his quarrel with Washington, that Washington didn't step in, and he wrote a blistering letter to Washington, So all of these one has to, deal with. People don't know. The point is, Ho Chi Minh is fascinated, and he wants a declaration of independence in Vietnam, and have an American type revolution, American type constitution after the end of the Second World War, when the Japanese has been defeated, when Indochina is becoming free. But what does America do? It helps France to get back into Vietnam and resurrect the empire. And so the war begins between the Vietnamese and the French, just like as the Americans fought against George III.
Exactly. Well, you're from your area of the world, Gandhi. Let's talk a little bit. Gandhi doesn't get, considering he was non-white. And he affected great change. I don't think you had the one movie made about him about 20 years ago, 25 years ago with
yes, great movie.
Ben Kingsley, who was, of course, Jewish.
Yes.
He's like an Indian. But, you had that movie about him, but he doesn't get it because really he was taking Thoreau's concept. Henry David Thoreau's the one that invented civil disobedience, but Gandhi had great success with it. And he brought down he ended the British Empire effectively. And I don't think he gets enough credit for that. What are your thoughts on Gandhi? Because to me, he gets talked about, but not the way I think he should be talked about more, because that was a great accomplishment.
Well, at the end of 2000, if you recall, or was it the end of 1999? I think I have it in my collection somewhere in my boxes. Time magazine, Life magazine, Economist, they all ran the Millennium cover story, if you remember. And I think that it was a time that had the last issue of the century. The man of the millennium was Einstein. Or the man of the century was Einstein. And the runner-up to in Times editorial that I read, and I'm trying to recollect it now, the runner-up were Winston Churchill and Mahatma Gandhi. But Einstein was a man of science, and it went along. So now putting that into context, from my opinion, if politically speaking, if they were choosing a political man of the year, century, it should have been Gandhi. But Gandhi was denied and was not ever given the Nobel Prize. He's the man who is the prophet of nonviolence and truth struggle. He's the man, as you correctly point out, brought down the British Empire, and he was immediately assassinated by Hindu fanatics, because of what happened leading up to his assassination. But preceding that was the division of India. That's a whole different story. But the story is being repeated in Middle East. It was repeated in Indochina. It's been repeated all over the place in Africa. What is the story? Divide and rule. India was divided. So the people who claim the creation of Pakistan, a Muslim country, were supported by the British, later on supported by the Americans, and one can now with confidence say that these were the people who the intelligence of these empires brought about when Gandhi, Nehru, and other, the Indian nationalists, would put in the jail during the critical years of the Second World War, because the position of the Congress Party, that Gandhi was one of them and Nehru was one of them, and a whole lot of others. I don't want to overload you with names, but their position was they were the nationalist party. They were the party working towards independence, and their position was that yes, we will support the empire in the war against fascism and against Japanese militarism, but we will do it as a free people. So they led what is called the Quit India movement, and the British put all of these people together and put them in the jail. And the divide and rule policy was implemented from behind the backs by supporting various ethnic groups or religious groups who were fanatic, who wanted their own country, and so on and so forth. And India was divided. So Gandhi was blamed by the fanatic Hindus as opposed to fanatic Muslim for having divided India, and they shot him up.
Yeah, so I
So
was about to mention, yeah, I went to Twisted Pistol, and this is I remember during the summer of 2020 when again Donald Trump was president, but they were tearing down statues all over America during the BLM riots, and he did nothing about it naturally.
right.
But they tore down a statue of Gandhi in somewhere, and this is the first I heard that like Twisted Pistol saying Gandhi was a racist fascist sympathizer. So I've heard he slept with his underage niece to test his faith. I've heard those things, but the idea that he was a racist is, I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous. How is First of all, what are your thoughts on that? Is that just an attempt to slander him, his reputation? And how is Gandhi looked at in today's India? Is he considered a hero?
Well, that's the story I'm going to write about. You have just
Okay.
pulled me out, so I'll share it with you now. The story
Okay.
is waiting in my Substack to work on it, and I've gone through a difficult time over the last couple of months.
Yes.
That
Yes.
I mentioned that, and I'm slowly
Yes.
coming back. Um, the story is, um, it will surprise you. It will surprise others. But now that we are in a global situation, you're seeing what is happening, and I hope we'll get into Bondi Beach. But the story
Oh, yeah.
is, who controls the media? Who controls the narrative in the Western world, whether it is in English or in French or whatever? Now with this alternate media, people are hearing other voices, but it is basically the Jewish oligarchs, whether you're talking about Rupert Murdoch, whether you're talking about New York Times, whether you're talking about all the big, three-letter
Agencies, sure.
television sets and so on. And now, of course, CBS has been bought over by Ellison. I don't know what they're going to buy over next time. So on. So here's the story. This is going back to the 1930s and 40s. And the Zionists in Palestine, they said among themselves, we have connection with the leaders of India, especially Mahatma Gandhi, who was one of the biggest name at that time. One of the best biographies, by the way, about Gandhi has been written by the American Louis Fisher. I mean, I would refer that to you if you get a chance to look at it. It is a phenomenal biography by an American. Because America looked to India with very favorable eyes, as did Roosevelt. and in bringing about the end of European colonialism. So, and Gandhi in South Africa, when he began his implementing, putting into practice his views about truth struggle, Satyagraha in Sanskrit, and nonviolence, he began in South Africa. And then he came to India, came home back. So while he was in South Africa, he was contacted, and there were a number of Jews, number of Anglican ministers and Christian pastors who participated with Gandhi in South Africa in the resistance to the white movement. Uh, the movie deals with that in the one you referred to. And so there were Jews there, and among them there were Zionists, and they were very, very close to Gandhi. And so in the 1930s and 40s, they said in Palestine, those who had come from Eastern Europe, let us connect with Gandhi and win him over to our cause. And the man who was designated to engage with Gandhi was Martin Buber. You possibly know about Martin Buber. You heard about it. The great, very celebrated rabbi from Germany who had gone across to Palestine during the Mandate years. And so he began the correspondence, and he wrote to Gandhi and said, given your position, given your reach, given your high regard that people have for you, I hope you can join us and help us and support our cause for a Jewish state in Palestine. So that is in a nutshell that they approached Gandhi. Gandhi responded to those correspondence. And Gandhi said, while I support you all completely, what is happening in Germany and your suffering, and I stand with you, but I will not support the objective you all have to, transfer, push out the native population Palestinian. We are engaged in this anti-colonial struggle over here, and you want me to support your colonial struggle? That I cannot do.
Yeah,
so that became the rift, and the Jews never forgave Gandhi.
No, they explained his reputation.
They destroyed his reputation.
Yes.
They tried to destroy his reputation, and they have continued to do that.
Yeah.
So this is what it is. What happens? They have been at the forefront of the defamation of the Prophet and Islam, and people like me have been silent about it because you cannot. I mean, the moment you try to get into this discussion, it is giving more oxygen to the people who engage in this sort of thing. The common decency is not to get into ad hominems, and that I strictly practice. That's exactly what anyone will tell you. This is not something Indian or Arab or Jew or American. This is common human decency. We might have conflict with each other for any number of reasons, and yes, people around the world has conflict with America today, but nobody ever stands up and say, you are a Christian, this is the problem with Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Muslims revere Jesus Christ. Hindus revere Jesus Christ. What has Jesus Christ got to do with modern colonialism and imperialism? What has Muhammad got to do with crusade and wars and so on and so forth?
Exactly, and that's why it's ridiculous to hear to hear us referred to as our Judeo-Christian background. That's they contradict each other. And as you mentioned, I know, I think I told you, my sister married an Iranian, and so she lived in Tehran for many years. She's 19 years older than me, but she has a kid that's older than me. It's really strange, but so over the course of years, I've met a lot of Iranians. And so I know a little bit about the culture. And I've never met, I've never met one I didn't like, really. And but once we get to talking, they realize they can talk to me about it. They all have a feeling about Jewish power. Every one of them I've ever met, because again, their country, they see the same thing, and it's especially stronger now because they are now becoming the new hobgoblin. This is what I mean. If you look at I have my dentist is Iranian, and he and I talk about politics for everything. But he was. I didn't know if you probably know because you know everything about the world. But I'm trying to figure out why are we so disposed to try to go after Venezuela? I said, what does that have to do with Israel? Because all and he told me no, Israel. Israel thinks Venezuela is buddy buddy with Iran, and that's why they're they're trying to go after them because of that. I don't know if you knew that or not.
Yeah, I mean, Israel has interest because the interests follows the interests of America as a world power and an empire. And Israel, as I have said, is the cat's paw or the tiger's paw. It was
Mm.
Senator Jesse Helm who said it is the aircraft carrier, and so did Biden, the U.S.
Mhm.
aircraft carrier. So wherever America is moving, the aircraft carrier is sent. So there is Israel. So getting into the granular about Iran, you see the defamation that begins.
Yeah.
There can be no explanation of contemporary Iran, modern Iran, without the story of the Dulles brother under President Eisenhower overthrowing an elected democratic government of
Yes.
Iran, Mohammad
Yeah.
Mossadegh.
Yeah.
What was Muhammad Mossadegh's crime? Muhammad Mossadegh's crime was he led the nationalization of the Anglo-Iranian oil company, Dutch Petroleum, British Petroleum, California Standard Oil. That was the conglomerate that was controlling all of Iran's, basic resource. And so he nationalized it so that they could have some degree of input and sharing of the income, the revenue. All right. So he was overthrown. The guy had, like Nehru, like Ho Chi Minh, like Gandhi, that's the generation that born in the late 19th century, went to Europe. Muhammad Mossadegh became a lawyer, graduating out of Sorbonne. So they're back again. What is he studying? He's studying the French Enlightenment philosophers,
Exactly.
right? But he's
Exactly.
a Muslim. I'm a Muslim. We want that. We want modernization. We want reform. If you ever get a chance to get into the granular detail about what is the modern struggle of the Muslim world, is the same in Indochina, same in China, same in Africa. It is how do we become a modern society? And ironically, but it is not irony when you put it in the larger philosophical sense, America stand as the template of modernity, not Britain. Britain is the colonial imperial power. It's America the stand because America is the first country that establishes a republican system of government, a constitutional system of government. Montesquieu was writing about it. Jefferson put it into practice. Jefferson and Madison, right?
Yeah.
The theory of Montesquieu comes into practice with Jefferson and Madison. When I read the book, Thomas Paine's book, the collectioner's book, in the Rights of Man, he's talking about religion, his religion, that's Islam. You take out Muhammad and that's Islam. You see,
Yeah.
so this is the problem. The problem is that when the Second World War ended, that's why I had a somewhat different view from you on Roosevelt. Not that Roosevelt was all
Yeah.
the problem, but that one little, window that opens in Roosevelt's mind, that the European colonialism has to be ended. The Second World War will be not the reestablishment of the colonial powers. And that began in England. 2 weeks after the end of the war, Churchill is out of office, right? And he was out of office because it is not modern England where you have a population, mixed population from the third world now in England. It was
Right.
99% English. That means the people who came back from the war, they all unanimously voted against Churchill. They had it enough. The
Mhm.
non-Irish, as you say, the non-Irish had no influence in that
Yes.
election. But Churchill was the biggest grifter for the non-Irish.
Oh
The
yes.
non-Irish
Yes.
carried him through his entire life, paying his bills.
Yeah, he was an
People,
alcoholic. He was a terrible alcoholic, and they covered up for him.
absolutely, at his income, he could not have sustained the lifestyle he sustained. That was done by the non-Irish.
Yeah,
All the books that he wrote and published, and so on and so forth, because they had invested in him to do exactly what they wanted him to do.
yeah.
And what they wanted him to do was to bring down the British Empire. That's the cunning of history I'm talking about in today's Substack. That's Hegel's term. So Churchill goes out to be the greatest prime minister since Duke of Wellington, who defeated Napoleon, but he ends up defeating the British Empire 2 weeks after the end of the war. Attlee becomes a prime minister, and the first thing he does is he announces that Britain is leaving India. And with the leaving of India, everything falls. The domino falls, because that's it. That's India is the crown jewel. So, so coming back to it, the struggle within Islam, and I've written about this, I published about this, that was the invitation that was given to me by Center for Security Policy in Washington. I don't know if you know about them, Frank Gaffney and company,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I got
Boy,
to know them, became friends.
Matthew wouldn't like what you're saying now.
Yeah. But I'm a poor academic. I was called. People knew about me. I was called, and I was talking. So I gave them history lesson. I talked about Islam. I talked about the Quran. I talked about Prophet. And I warned them that the Muslim Brotherhood is not knowing that this think tank was a CIA product.
Sir.
I am not into that. I'm into my own studies and so on. And I was warning them. And in Canada, I was warning them that, look, Muslim Brotherhood is basically an instrument, first of the MI6 and now of the CIA and Mossad and so on and so forth. So guess what happens? The Conservative Party with which I was associated, they expelled me from the party. The reason given was I was an Islamophobe.
So what you've certainly changed there. But I wanted to address a couple people. First of all, Deborah, I'm sorry you had to leave so early in the chat room. And Chris Graves, I answered today when you called, and I tried calling you. You didn't answer, and I called back. So I don't know what else I can do. So I hope you. It's good to see you back here. I put up on from Eve. I don't know. He's got a long thing. EWIAH. He said the book, The 10,000 Day War, Ho Chi Minh asked America to help create a republic like the U.S. with a similar constitution. However, they didn't want to go against the French after World War II. It's kind of what you're saying, somebody in the chat room.
So what is the question? I missed it.
No, he's making a basic comment, but I think it backs up. He said the book, The 10,000 Day War, Ho Chi Minh asked America to help create a republic like the U.S. with a similar constitution. However, they didn't want to go against the French after World War II. That's basically what you were saying.
Oh, yeah, exactly, yeah. Well, one of the finest book on Vietnam is Stanley Carnell's book on Vietnam. Stanley Carnell, who covered the Vietnam War and then wrote about it. But there are many books on Vietnam. The biography of Ho Chi Minh, and the French have written about it. Yes, absolutely. He wanted to adopt the American Constitution for Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
But if you read L. Fletcher Pruitt's book on JFK and murder, he talks about Vietnam, and there it is, and this is in 1952, 53.
Mm-hmm.
He's in Vietnam, and the Americans are saying, that is the CIA people, OSS people are saying, we have to spark a war to keep our business going.
Yeah, well, Fletcher Prouty was kind of he wasn't to the same degree, but he was very similar to Smedley Butler, who wrote War is a Racket back about World War I. They talked about all the exploitation, all the money that was made by the war racketeers. That's kind of what Fletcher Prouty was talking about. He was talking more about the CIA. But Viren has a question for you. Salim, any thoughts on the 11/26 Mumbai attacks? It seems to have been a CIA, ISI, DEA style event, not a religiously inspired one.
Yes, absolutely. It was a CIA, Mossad, MI6 operation. Remember, the Pakistan military and military intelligence people are completely in the hands and control of Western intelligence. The entire Afghan war, and I'm referring not to the 20-year Afghan war that America was engaged in after 2003. I'm talking about the Afghan war against the Soviet Union from 1979 to 1989. It began during the Carter administration, when Carter administration responded by creating the Rapid Deployment Force, which then later became the CENTCOM, based out of Qatar right now. The war was fought as a revenge over Vietnam. I mean, the Soviets had come into Afghanistan to protect the government that was allied with Moscow, and that led to the war by mobilizing what became the Taliban, Al Qaeda, and so on and so forth. It was a insurgency war, a guerrilla war, during the Reagan years, and Pakistan was the frontline state. The money flowed from Saudi Arabia, just as the money flowed from the Middle East, the Gulf state during the Iran-Contra war under Reagan year again, because the American government could not directly fund the Contras, so they had to bring in the money from outside. Similarly, in the case of Afghanistan, and Pakistan has been a frontline state. I mean, right now, today, the former Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, is in jail and possibly will never be allowed to come out. His crime: in 2023, he went to Moscow and he stayed neutral on the Ukraine question when the Americans, Biden administration and the Trump administration, wanted Pakistan to continue to be the frontline state against Russia. If you look at the map, you look at the border, all of that is very prevalent. And so it was an action that was taken in Mumbai to tell the Indians, in a sense, indirectly, beware. We can do more of these things and strike your sensitive positions. So yes, it was that, and that's the false flag operation that has been going on. Nobody wants. I mean, the common people don't want, but there are enough people with grievances. 2 weeks before the Bondi Beach incident, what happened in Washington? People have forgotten all that already. Then Afghan soldier, ex-Afghan intelligence officer, came and shot up some other National Guard people in Washington, D.C. People are not talking about that. But he was brought from Afghanistan by the American intelligence. He had served in Afghanistan with the American intelligence. Why did he do this? I mean, we haven't had a chance to enter into this thing, a discussion. I don't know how much time you have.
Oh no, we have another hour. But I wanted to say, since you brought up Australia, we'll talk about that. Will he's in South Australia, and it's wonderful to have you listening. Will, thanks very much. And also we have Michelle from Germany that is announced here. So this is a worldwide thing. I get so gratified when I hear people all over the world watching this. But yeah, let's talk about Bondi. I called it not Pam Bondi Beach. You pronounce it like an American Bondi, not. But Bondi Beach. What do you think is? What I mean, I wrote a Substack about it. I'm very skeptical, needless to say, of it with the way the guy looked taking a selfie, and just rather convenient, wasn't it? Wasn't it very fortuitous how this happened again? Right when I think the way we look at things right now, I think Zionism is on the ropes in terms of public opinion. It's never been lower. People are seeing through it. It's because it's indefensible. You can't, especially when you look at the ruins of Gaza. How do you defend that? Well, you come up with some tragedy that can try to, again, tug at people's heartstrings and say, well, look, here we are again, the world's greatest victims. What are your thoughts of Bondi Beach?
No, you're right. I mean, I read your piece, and all that you're saying is the response that we are asking the question. You're dead on, and I agree with you. The event itself is clouded, is fogged up. Now we are hearing the debate or the questioning of the Prime Minister of Australia, Albanese, that he already knew about this but didn't take action. The intelligence had informed him who these people were and so on and so forth. And yet the government has not released the detail if they knew or didn't know. Who are these people, the father and son? Are they Pakistanis? Are they Indians?
Yes.
More and more evidence now is coming out that the father and the son, I mean, the father, of course, he's from India. He's a Muslim who came to Australia as a student and then stayed behind, married a Italian woman of Italian Australian, and the son therefore is of half European, half South Asian in that sense. Um, uh, were they simply acting alone, or was there some group behind it? So we can now see that the son, we have been told, the people who are investigating it as independent journalists and or so on in the alternate media, that the son was connected with the local Australian branch of ISIS, that he had been going to a completely militant extremist sectarian branch of Islam's seminary to study the Quran, and that is ISIS. Well, that then flips over. The whole connection comes in with the Saudis and the Gulf state. They are the Wahhabi. They are the minority. They are the one who are deeply involved and have been deeply involved with the British intelligence, the American intelligence, the British government, the American government, going all the way back to World War One. I mean, it was a Muslim Brotherhood man who was in the army that killed the Egyptian president, Anwar Sadat, and so on. So it becomes more and more complicated who they are. Possibly they will never let us know who they are, just as the people who are rotting in Guantanamo Bay haven't had the time, in an open court where they can be investigated or asked questions. And so this will remain cloudy. The point that I want to put on the table with you, Don, is what happens when the justice system in any society crashes and doesn't exist anymore, or people have no more further trust in it. So where is the justice system? The justice system, that is, I'm talking global, the United Nations, has been boulderized and destroyed. By whom? By the founders. I mean, and this story one has to put into one understanding that when there is no justice, I mean, it's 2 years of genocide, mass killing is going on. And what have the Americans done to protect and shield the genocide and the Israelis? They have sanctioned the ICC. They have sanctioned and stopped any discussion at the UN about the genocide. And the people around the world, particularly the Muslim people, are watching this. And when the justice, they don't see any justice. So, I mean, the entire story of vigilantism, one can go back to reading, Louis L'Amour, Zane Grey, the story of the Western story in America, right? In Buffalo Bill, Daniel Boone, so on and so forth, in the Wild West, and see the movies like High Noon and etc. or Clint Eastwood, Good, Bad, and Ugly, or whatever it was called, and the whole range of Sergio Leone movie, So that is vigilante justice, and I think the vigilante justice hasn't spread as far and wide as it would have spread or could have spread. The surprising thing is it hasn't. So what you then happens is the false flag operations. And then you can easily blame it on the others. And of course, the defamation of Muslim and Islam has been an ongoing affair of the Zionists and the neocon, going back not simply to 9/11, but further back. You can go back almost to, Mossadegh's overthrow in Iran, and pick up a number. The kid, the 1967 war, the operations against Gamal Abdul Nasser, when Kennedy was desperately trying to bring about a peace, and Nasser was completely ready for that. The Suez War, and on and on. I can run down the detail, but it was in the 1970s, after the 73 war, that the motion was brought forth in the General Assembly, that Zionism is racism. You remember that, Don?
Sure.
And
Yes.
when
Yep.
Zionism is racism motion was put on the floor, it passed with an overwhelming vote,
Yeah.
right?
How many times has the UN condemned Israel? I mean, they've had so many actions against them, and U.S. vetoes it every time. I mean, for how
Exactly. I
many
mean,
decades? Yeah, yeah,
in the parliamentary vote at the General Assembly, the numbers had completely flipped from 1947 to what it was in 1975, and the
yeah,
numbers are flipping over and over. So my point is, that was the time Daniel Patrick Moynihan was the US ambassador to the UN, and he stood up and denounced the UN, and that was the beginning of defaming the UN, to the point that anything touching the UN is now, toxic from the American point. Go away, bye bye, as Ronald Reagan said. The only institution that is representative of the world, where the world can get together. You can send the UN to Geneva, you can send it to wherever, they can send it to Beijing, but there has to be a forum that represents the world. And the justice system that came out of Nuremberg trial is the 50 years later, it was reconstituted in terms of International Criminal Court, in which America did not join, but there is the International Court of Justice as part of the UN system. But
yeah.
none of them have taken a position, in fact, as if nothing is happening. So
Well,
the
yeah,
world is watching, and there is no justice. That's one thing I wanted to put on the board. Vigilantism. Bondi Beach could have been a vigilante attack, as was in America, that has happened so many times, and elsewhere. The other thing is the Hannibal doctrine. What we saw, what is official, that the Israelis will kill their own people if they need to kill their own people for their own purpose. So October 7th, the Israelis will not admit officially. That's why they cannot have an open discussion in their own system, in their own parliament, in their own justice system, who is responsible for October 7th, because the shootout that took place was by the Israelis, their helicopters, their armed people, that shot up most of the civilian population. And all of the finger pointing is basically a confession of what they themselves did. And so now this is going abroad. And so, if it is a false flag operation, then the people who died in Bondi Beach are Jews who were sacrificial, whether it
right.
was done by these vigilantes or whether it was done on the notice of the Mossad to carry out a Hannibal type doctrine type of operation. We will never know. But this is the problem that has happened when you try to protect a lie. Then more lies have to be put on board. You
Oh,
just keep on
exactly.
piling the lies.
I wanted to ask you, because you're a scholar of Islam. All I know is, as Will Rogers said, all I know is what I read in the papers. But the average American's view of Islam is very negative. We hear so many things about fundamentalists, as opposed to our fundamentalists. And what are true? Like, I was trying to address this in a thing I wrote Substack once. I don't know, as far as Iran. I don't know if they hang gay people to throw them off rooftops. I don't know. That's what we're told. I don't know how many women get stoned for not covering their faces in these countries. because I'm suspect of who's telling me this. I know what propaganda is, and I know they lie about everything. So maybe that stuff happened. What is your, in terms of how much of that stuff really happens? These awful, especially anti-female stuff, violence to women. They can't cover they have to cover their faces and all that stuff, and gay stuff. Is that is that mostly propaganda because they know Americans will react to that? That you're hurting women and now gays? And what's the truth there?
Well, it happens, and it happens in places which is still living in a pre-modern or primitive mindset. You know, it is not something that happens because Islam is telling them to do it. I
Yeah.
mean, the question of women being stoned, just to stick to that example, has been a story that has happened right throughout different cultures. I mean, if you remember the famous Zorba the Greek movie, in which the woman is stoned to death, right?
Yeah.
She was stoned to death um, because that was the way they dealt with the question of adultery, or they dealt with the question of sex outside of marriage, and so on and so forth. And in Afghanistan, in the remote parts of Iran, in Africa, it happens, and it has happened predating Islam, predating Christianity, predating the Bronze Age culture of Talmud. So the whole process of transformation is a very difficult and painful process. In India, for instance, the sati would take place. Sati was that when man died, his wife was put on the funeral pyre, and this was the practice of the Orthodox Hindus, um, and it was stopped during the colonial period, and India changed, but still there are events, the burning of the widow, that has taken place in recent times, because people who do this thing are still in that state of mind, in that mentality. So the violence that happens are violence not from the state or the government or from the people implementing quote unquote Sharia, the Islamic law. Though in the Sharia there are those injunctions. Now one has to, and this is where the complexity comes in. It is the Sharia is a man-made laws, but it refers to the Quran for its sanctions, you know, but it is man-made law. It is not Islam. I mean, in the Quran, the references is not about a stoning. It is about punishing, flogging the adulterer, both man and woman.
Yeah.
And this has been the Semitic law that has been there, or the Abrahamic law that's been there in the Torah, in the Bible, in the Quran. But this is not apologetic. It is there. The question is, how do you reform this? And that struggle of reformation is what has been going on within Islam in the modern
Right.
period. The irony is that the people who are struggling for reform, that is the majority of the people, are thwarted, impeded, derailed by the fanatics, the militants.
Right.
And
Right.
ironically, the militants and the fanatics have become the tool of the great powers.
Sure.
And, and
That's why I would like to. I personally don't think any of these terrorist groups. I'm suspect of any organic movement, any organic protest, because I know how hard it is to do that. But any of these big groups, Hamas and all that, I think they're all created by intelligence agencies or controlled. At the very least, like we know, our CIA has I wrote about it in my book, Hidden History. They've been inserting their agents in extremist organizations, like far left, like the Black Panthers, far right, like the Ku Klux Klan. They've been doing that for 60 years or more. They're still doing it. That's why on January 6th, we saw so many people there. Salim, are you up to? I can't guarantee. I never know when I'm going to get with this, but I open. What I do is I put the stream in. I'm going to put a link in the chat room, and people can jump in, and if they want to have questions or talk, they can come and on audio or video. Are you up to that? If I put it in there for them?
Yeah, I mean, it is your call,
Yeah, I
Don.
like that. I mean, sometimes we get a lot of people. Sometimes I don't know. They tell me they like it, but then half the time they don't participate. So there you go, guys. I'm putting the link in the chat room for you under my name and Tony's name. So I'd love to have your thoughts. You can join in if you have questions for Salim, or you just have thoughts you want to talk about. I see Carson Jeffries. I don't think you're related to me, but thanks for reposting the stream. Rocky, Merry Christmas to you too. But hopefully somebody come in. So anyway, so that's what are your, we talk about when because you and I are together on RB Ham show a lot. So we're on Beyond the Pale quite a bit. And hopefully, I think RB's probably watching it. I know he's ready to interview tonight. And there he is. He's right here.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Fancy meeting you here, RB. We've switched roles. How you doing?
Yeah. I've got a few days off because of the Christmas season, so I'm not on the road freezing my arse off, strapping down loads and stuff. So yeah, glad to be here. Yeah, just a reminder that Salim will be on my show at 9 o'clock tonight, Eastern Standard Time on Beyond the Pale on Rumble. So tune in. We're going to carry on some more of this conversation, but I'm going to be talking more explicitly about basically Salim's transformation from being in the belly of the beast of the neocon establishment and how overwhelmed he was, and how like he said, he was called an Islamophobe for his positions, even though he's a Muslim. And then later on, now he's actually opening up the conversation and talking the truths about what's going on in Palestine. He's called an anti-Semite now, because as we know, all you have to do to be labeled an anti-Semite is to criticize legitimately the Israeli government, the secular government of Israel. And what's really strange, I think Elon Poppy said this about Israel, and I want Salim to maybe expand on this. Elon Poppy said that most Zionists are atheists, but they all believe that God gave them the land. Period.
Well, I've been surrounded by such people, RB, and there is no logic. There is no way to, get them to be serious about what they're thinking about it. I was once in a Dutch Reformed church, and this question emerged, and I said that I don't know how God became an agent for the 20th century real estate. and they got very upset. But yeah, I mean, it cannot be explained. I mean, and as if you have read my Substack today, you can see nothing can be explained. I mean, the blood of the Jews, the DNA of the Jews are divine, and the blood of non-Jews, the DNA of non-Jews, are of no consequence. And when asked what is the difference between the two, Rabbi Cook, one of the great rabbis of the Jews in Palestine, he was the chief rabbi of Palestine during the period 1920, 1935, says the difference is as great as the difference between the soul of human and the soul of cattle's, So all of us are souls of cattle, and here are these 21st century people running around advising the greatest power on earth, United States, and sitting in the Congress, who, if you push them and ask, how do you explain that? I mean, we saw what happened to Ted Cruz talking to Tucker Carlson. He couldn't get even the verse right from Genesis 12 points, but he was absolutely dogmatically certain that you will be blessed if you bless Israel, and you will be cursed if you curse Israel. No mention of that in Genesis. I mean, no mention of Jews or Judaism in that chapter. Abraham was not a Jew. I mean, yeah, there was nothing Jewish about Abraham, but the scribes took him and wrote him up. And here we are at the very precipice of what could be possibly a nuclear war because of these guys who believe in such utter nonsense. And if you say that to them or talk about it and ask, explain it to us, please, we want to know, then we become the bad guys, who have to be put away, who have to be gagged up.
Yeah, it used to be considered anti-Semitic to hate Jews, but now if Jews hate you, that's anti-Semitic.
Yeah. I mean, pointing out to them that, I mean, again, it's not Salim pointing this out. I'm just picking up Shlomo Sand or Arthur Kessler and others. Arthur Kessler's famous book, The 13th Tribe. He's pointing out that if the Khazar thesis is right, then the people who are going to claiming about Palestine, they didn't come from the Jordan. They came from the Caucasus. And so on and so forth.
Yeah, they didn't pass over the Jordan River on their way out. They passed over the Volga River on their way out.
The Volga River, and so, but people, I feel, not feel. This is again study and reading that the great irony is that the North American population is the most brainwashed population, and that was being said or being written by Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman in their classic book, The Manufacturing of Consent. I mean, if you recall, in that one book, example that both Chomsky and Herman is providing is how American young people are brilliant, that they know all the statistic at a drop of a coin of baseball. Baseball is a game of statistics. Right?
Yeah.
You know it.
Yeah.
And if you say such and such pitcher is the best pitcher as opposed to that, and if they disagree, they will drown you with the statistic, whether it was Rivera the best pitcher or Sandikoff was the best pitcher, and so on and so forth. But when it comes to, history and world politics and so on and so forth, they would have the toughest time trying to find the difference between Iraq and Iran. I remember that war, the 10-year war that Saddam Hussein was green-lighted to fight against Ayatollah Khomeini from 1981 to 88 or 1980 to 88. And the evening news people couldn't make the difference between Iran or Iran and Iraq, and it became a joke. It became a complete joke at that time. And it's a problem, whether it is Iran and Iraq, or whether it is Vietnam and Cambodia, or whether it is India and Pakistan.
Or Ukraine.
Pardon?
Or Ukraine now. Like
Ukraine
most Americans.
now, it doesn't matter. They, the British did, and now the Americans do. They have their hands everywhere.
Yeah.
And to ask the question why, then we become the bad guy. I mean, I called out the Ukraine war in 2022 as a disaster. That was the 60th anniversary of Cuban Missile Crisis, and no senator, no congressman could even figure out that this was a redux.
Yeah.
Well, we just, as you know, in my latest Substack, I talked about a little bit about the expression "peace on earth," which is very popular at this time of the year. Everybody says peace on earth, right? Goodwill to men, but we never have peace. I say, so they ought to stop saying it, because just say war on earth, and you say rest in peace, because that's what you do when somebody dies. But we don't have peace on earth. And you talked about one of the things I get irritated about. So many Christians will respond to me when I'm talking about war. Well, the Bible said there will be wars and more wars. And I said, well, okay, so we can't possibly fight that. It's the same mentality that you get with Armageddon has to happen, because the Bible foretells it. I mean, I would think God would be pleased if we could stop some of that, which we should be able to. But the idea that And this is, I think, at the heart of why this is so wrong, is that this is driven, and again, they would call this, you know, demonic, or they would call it, certainly they would call it crazy in other terms of being so religiously bent on something like, causing a World War III. But in this case, because it serves Zionist interests, they let the fundamentalists do it. They criticize everything else about the fundamentalists. Well, what are you talking about? You're against gays. You're against this and that. You're crazy. And they make fun of them. They don't make fun of them for being such pro-Zionists. You ever see anybody?
Yeah,
Why is that, I wonder? Because it serves their interest.
Well, they're the Raptor crowd, isn't it? We have
Yeah.
a basketball team in Canada, Raptors, so we mustn't get confused between basketball NBA
Right.
team and the Raptor crowd of what's the name of the guy? John Hagee and
Yeah,
the whole lot of them. But here's the problem. The basic problem is that if our school system, it all begins right there in the grade school. If our school system is busy getting drag queens in the classroom and in the common room, and not do maths and English and history, what sort of people will come out at the end of the day? And that's what has happened. I mean, it was Alan Bloom. I was at that time finishing my undergraduate and going to graduate school, but I was lucky to sit and audition Alan Bloom. He was at the University of Toronto at that time. This is late 1970s. And he was sharing with his class. I was auditioning because I was not in political philosophy. In philosophy. And Alan Bloom was in philosophy. But I was interested, and I went with my friends whom I knew were taking the courses. And he was sharing at that time his draft of what became the bestseller, The Closing of the American Mind. That was in 1979, 1980. And he was talking about, the whole generation going back to Second World War. So we have now almost 100 years, if I just take the standard that Alan Bloom was referring to, how the American education system got derailed and when did it happen and what was the basis of it. It is now almost 100 years if you take that date from before Second World War to where we are now. It is not at all a surprise that our kids don't know the fundamentals.
Well, I mean, isn't there something? There was that lady that wrote the book, The Deliberate Dumbing Down of the American Mind, the education system. And I think a lot of it it started happening in the 1960s because the powers that ought not be were quite upset with the fact that the middle class America stopped that Vietnam War. It wasn't the flower power hippies. It was middle class moms and dads who'd had enough of their kids being sent over to die in a needless war. And they stepped up and they basically stopped it. They said, okay. And the whole idea of the draft system stopped then too. And I think ever since then, the middle class, the powers that ought not be, have trained their sights on the middle class to get rid of the power of the middle class to have a say in which direction their country goes.
They want to get rid of the middle class. Chris Graves has tried to enter the studio twice. I don't know. First time he's only there for a second. Second time I put him in, then he just left. So Chris, come back in if you want to join. I'm not sure what happened there. Maybe you have connection problems or something. I don't know I think that's what, if America, the greatness of modern America, the only greatness that I see really, the greatness is the system the founders created. And then post-World War boom, I wouldn't support any war, including World War II, but the post-war boom gave us the middle class. It gave us the first time the world had seen anything like it. It was a thriving middle class. Every job paid a living wage. You could raise a family pumping gas, working at a gas station. You could do that. You could buy a house. Your wife didn't have to work, and you wouldn't have to be limited to 2 kids. You could have Americans had huge, especially Catholics, had huge families back then. That was the economy. It was the envy of the world. A lot of it was driven by, unfortunately, by the military-industrial complex, the growth of that with defense contracts and everything. That's what made America great, was that middle class. Middle class is being squeezed out of existence. I don't know. Do they have anything like that in India or any of the? I don't. I guess the English had something like a middle class, but other countries have anything like that?
Yeah, I
So
mean,
Amos,
English had it, but now we look back at it, and I can know why and how it had it. 10 million people ruling uh, almost one quarter of the world's
yeah,
in terms
right.
of land, and the resources of that one quarter of the world, sucked in like a vacuum cleaner into the British Isles, and that gave them an edge that was far beyond what was their capacity. In the case of America, it is quite different. I mean, America is one of the richest land area in the world, and you say World War One and after.
No,
Um, but
World War II and after. World War II and
oh,
after.
World War Two.
Yeah, the post-war, that post-war, yeah.
But the record also shows, Don, that once the Civil War was over and the Great Reconstruction began, despite all the problems of this Confederate states to the south below the Mason-Dixon line, that was the boom. That by the time World War One comes along, the whole world knows, that is, the advanced Western world knows, technological world knows, that America is on the upward drive that will supersede everybody else.
Yeah.
Germany had emerged as the great power in Europe, and that's why the British wanted to cut them down, not to allow them to have a naval fleet, not to be able to challenge the British, overseas. Militarily on the continent, they were the power. But they stupidly got into a war, or they were driven into a war and they couldn't get out of it. But America was absolutely, on a rise that would take over everything. And then after Second World War, it was a second time that Europe committed harakiri upon themselves. They lay flat, so there was no, and Japan was gone. So that period, between the period that you're talking about, say 1950 to 1970,
Yeah.
was absolutely the golden age of
Yeah.
of post-war America. But once the others rose up and started, on a civilizational basis, started revamping, rebooting their own societies, with different values or different history. But the one overwhelming fact was emulating America in terms of economy and technology, and the goodwill that America had. The America started losing its goodwill after Kennedy. Now that we can look back,
Right.
the three of us are contemporaries, so we are looking back at our preteen years. We were not teenagers when Kennedy died, or was murdered, killed, and everything that we experienced from that moment on, despite the Vietnam War, was, compared to where we are now, was the golden years. Music, literature, sports. When America lost the basketball game in the finals to Soviet Union in the Olympic. When was it? 1972, I think it was.
76. Oh no, 72. You're right. It was 72.
It was 72 Olympic. Yeah.
In Munich.
It was a shock. I mean, to all of us. I remember I was 20 years old, and I was deeply interested in chess. I was fanatic about chess. And the 72 game, Fischer and Spassky, I was not alone. I was in Bengal. We were all sitting, listening to the BBC or the Voice of America, trying to follow the results of Fischer and cheering for Fischer, Absolutely.
Well, Fischer was around. Boy, he turned into a real fascinating character. Let me tell you, he's probably
absolutely.
he was very critical of Jews. I mean, he was Jewish, but he really was. He became I would love to talk to him. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, he didn't want to have anything to
He
do
was a
with
very
it.
brilliant man, Bobby Fischer. And when you're that smart and that brilliant, it's sort of like a brilliant mind like that. when you're confronted with something as stark as what the Anglo-American Empire is using Zionism and Jewish supremacism for, the reasons they're doing it, the wars that have been created, the millions of people that have died because of it, I think it kind of drove them over the edge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah, and absolutely. And I think that, but you're right. I should, because America, certainly by the time of the 1920s, that was considered a boom period. That was the roaring 20s. And then, of course,
Yeah,
the stock market grew. But so they had already built, but I think what differentiated the post World War II era, they didn't have any suburbs yet. The birth of the suburbs, that's what made the middle class, because that was that was an entirely new concept. People lived in the city or the country. No, there's something different. And that's what I, grew up looking at and living in and live in now. And that's what I don't want America to lose. And I don't know. I assume, maybe there's something like that in England, whatever. But I think that was very unique to here, and I think that's symbolic of the middle class.
I think right now, if you want to look at the rise of a middle class somewhere, China is now standing out as a place where the middle class is actually being created because of their economic boom. And they're going to probably start running into their own troubles of how do we keep control of this middle class that are going to start wanting their own rights and privileges. China might run into that problem soon because they are booming and they have a functioning middle class that are making enough money to go on vacations. Like most of the world's tourists now are Chinese, and they go all over the world.
Well, and that's, I talk about this a lot. There was the 19th and the, what I think of Roosevelt, Salim, but one great thing that came out of the New Deal was a 1938 legislation. And it was because of pressure from Huey Long, who was my hero. Huey Long wanted a 30, maybe 20-hour work week. He wanted a month-long vacation for all workers. He wanted all kinds of great stuff. But because of that pressure, after they killed Huey Long, we got the 40-hour work week. We got overtime. For the first time, the average people could take vacations. Up until that, I had my grandfather, I heard stories about him that he was a security guard. He worked 365 days a year. I mean, he never had a day off. He got to come home on Christmas to eat lunch. He worked 12-hour days, and that was common then. There was no sick leave. There was no vacation leave, no overtime, anything like that. That was revolutionary. And so I think that I got to tip my hat that was the best piece of the deal. It doesn't get mentioned either. But now, of course, Republicans, they would like to remove that. They don't like paying overtime, and they've already killed off the unions. So I don't know, kind of a tangent that we went off on, but.
And that kind of ties into what's going on with China now. The irony of it, of course, is that the free trade agreements like NAFTA and all that were going on in the 80s and 90s basically stripped the United States, Canada, most of Europe, well, not most of Europe, some of Europe, especially England, of their industrial base, being able to go make a living working middle class jobs and taking care of a family. They got rid of all that, shipped them for pennies on the dollar to Mexico and other places in South America, and especially China, Vietnam, Thailand. So they shipped everything over there. So they make all our goods now and they come over on boat. And so a lot of these people talk about, well, Trump's going to face down China and all this stuff. Well, China could win any war against the United States right now by simply doing one thing: stopping the ships from coming over and supplying the stuff we need. Because Walmart, because all they'd have to do, if Walmart and Rona and Superstore and Staples are all empty of products, we'll go down faster than. It's the ultimate takedown. You don't need a military to do it. It's the art of war via Sun Tzu. Deprive the enemy of what they need, and it's over. Because that's how dependent we are on Chinese labor, on Mexican labor, and people don't even understand that. And so when Trump starts talking about tariffs and stuff, well, that's all great, but you don't have the industrial base to back it up.
Yeah,
we don't make our own stuff anymore.
Yeah, first you have to rebuild the factories. As I said, I support tariffs, but you don't do it if you don't. He has no domestic competition. I mean, first you got to start producing something then, but he's doing it ass backward, which is typical of him.
Well, the only thing we do really produce, and this goes for all Western countries, including Canada and Sweden, I found out also. Sweden is very big in this, and the United States, of course, the leaders, military components, missiles, bombs, half-track vehicles, tanks, all armaments of all kinds, mines. The Western nobody's better at doing that than us. So we create all these things and we sell them to all these third world countries to fight these wars against each other. Meanwhile, if worse comes to worse and China shuts down the global Atlantic trade, that's all we'd have to do to comfort ourselves. We wouldn't have anything to light a fire with, but hey, we'll have lots of guns and lots of ammo. And so, of course, a lot of people talk about a civil war coming in the United States. It almost seems to be stoked on purpose by the globalists who see the United States and the Bill of Rights and the ideas of the American independence as one of their impediments towards orchestrating and implementing their globalist plan, is the mere presence, the mere action of the Enlightenment and what it did with the American independence and the rights of man in France and all that stuff. So they've been actively fighting against our own self-determination as a way to get rid of us, because we're in the way of their globalist plans. That they want one global currency, one global system, right? And eventually moving, and I've read this, they want to move the UN from New York to Jerusalem, and that is going to be Pax Judaica. Barry Zhang, that professor from China, he's from Canada actually. He was originally from China. He came to Canada. He now lives in the States. But he has a series of classes about this. He says what he sees developing is the end of the American empire and the beginning of Pax Judaica, where all the countries are going to be in trade and in talks with a super Jewish state in Israel, and that everything's going to be moved to there. Like they're becoming the global titans when it comes to artificial intelligence and technology and stuff. It's them. And so all these people that are saying, well, what Israel's doing is going to destroy Israel because everybody's turning against them. Well, the whole world's population may turn against them in revulsion, but if the governments of all the world are working with them and keeping them in business, that says a whole other thing. And a lot of people say, well, why doesn't China stop Israel? Well, China and Israel have deep ancient traditions together. They both have cuneiform script. They both write from right to left. And if you ever notice that the Chinese checkerboard is a Star of David, maybe you'll start asking some more serious questions.
That's right.
Well, I mean,
I've taken up enough of your time, though.
I mean, trying to figure out the future is always a mug's game, but something comes out. It's like we have lotteries, somebody can strike a Super Bowl. What is it? A Powerball and overnight become, whatever, multi millionaires. But coming back to the very simple thing that you were pointing out, the simple in the sense, the main issue, what has happened to the middle class. The middle class always comes about in a manufacturing society. It take away manufacturing and there is no middle class. So who brought this about? I mean, this is a question that is not mysterious. America went from 1970s, the golden age, to where we are today in less than 50 years, from manufacturing to financialization, that is to playing the casino, so China and Russia now. I traveled through Russia in the 1990s, just after its collapse, and I saw how desperate and poor Russia was. And I was telling to the Russian, the people with whom I stayed, that my goodness, we in India looked up to Russia, but what we have in India, you don't even have a fraction of that in terms of consumer goods and so on and so forth. But Russia has caught up, because ultimately science is not a patent, a property of any group of people. That they were once science cracks a nut and opens up an avenue to understand. I mean, Newton's science went global. That is Principia Mathematica, and once people understood that, the rest was a matter of history, catching up and implementing it. That's the speed with which now, I mean, Newton's time and our time is the speed with which, you might call it imitation or emulation, is taking place. And so as America went from manufacturing to financialization because of the interests of certain group of people, the inevitable was going to happen, because the manufacturing raised those other societies up. and the Chinese did it faster and better because it was far more cohesive. China talks about the 2 centuries of humiliation. I mean, that is the constant theme. China has gone through 2 centuries of humiliation. And this is where I will say to my dear friend RV, those people who say these things about China and Israel are talking surface. The years of humiliation, the, the 2 centuries of humiliation the Chinese are referring to is the open door policy and the opium wars. And that was done through India by the British supporting the Sassoon family. You have the Rothschild family in Europe, you had the Sassoon. The Sassoons were Baghdadi or Babylonian Jews who migrated. The patriarch of the Sassoon family came to Bombay when the British, took over India, basically, in the early quarter of the 19th century. And they are the ones who exported into China, brought into China the opium from India, the opium trade. Under the protective flag of the British and later the Americans, the Sassoon family became phenomenally rich. And when India became independent, they left. They went to Britain. And now there is no opium trade. So what we have, hair lotion, the Vidal Sassoon, the name is still there. They married into Rothschild family and the wealth is there. But the Chinese, they have deep memories. I think most people have deep memories. They know who basically destroyed them, and this is coming out, and they're
Yeah.
going to come out.
Yeah.
So the fact that they write from right to left, I write from right to left. Urdu is written from right to left. Persian is written from right to left. Arabic is written from right to left. So
Wow, really? True.
So, I mean, it was Adam Smith who said to his students when asked about the problems that, at that time they were facing with the American war going on. And he said, son, there is a lot of ruin in a nation. So, it's like the donut, whether you focus on the hole or you focus on the dough, it is never full. We look at what is successful or what is booming, but what is the ruins that has its cost, and if you go back and see in the most recent Substack essay, Don is talking about the 2% non-Irish, and then he points out that the Muslims are only a fraction below the 2%.
Yeah, they're not. That's very close.
Yeah, they're very close, but they didn't come to take away the Bill of Rights. They in fact came to survive under the Bill of Rights, because they couldn't. One of the stories about India Pakistan was that this is in the heydays of the American golden age, so the 1960s, and Pakistan was running military dictatorship and India was a democracy with Nehru. And so the folk story was a dog from Pakistan comes across the border and is trying to head to India, and a dog from India comes to the same border and trying to head to Pakistan. So they get into a conversation. And the Indian dog says to the Pakistani dog, why are you going to India? There is not enough food over there. And the dog says, well, I can bark over there. And the Indian dog says, well, I'm going for food to Pakistan. I've been barking all the time in India. So that is what it was, the poverty of India and the military dictatorship of Pakistan,
I'm going to put the link back in here again, guys. If more of you want to participate this, I appreciate it. Somebody tried and they didn't get in, but anyhow, so that's, obviously very interesting stuff. But I think that, I've written, and I'm talking more and more, but I think that maybe they didn't see this as I call it the Trumpenstein project, but that divided America along these party lines. Everybody's either a Democrat or Republican again. There's no movement out there for a third party or more that we should need, or really independent party. Everybody's stuck in these two stupid parties because of Trump. But what is happening is because of this thing, and I don't know why, typically they don't let the people that control thing, which includes a lot of non-Irish, don't let things happen unless they want it to. And this openness about discussing Jewish, certainly Israel, Zionism, and Jewish power, disproportionate power, it's everywhere in the internet. Candace Owens sounds like David Duke now. I mean, half the time. I mean, it's amazing. I never thought I would see this. So what is happening is that the left-right paradigm, I think, is shifting, and it's slowly becoming Zionist versus anti-Zionist. Do you see that? I think that's the way that the division is becoming now.
Or ironically, the Zionists would like that to be broadcast, so they are the victims. I would say that what's happening is instead of left right on a horizontal plane, it is top down. So it's whether you are America first or you are whatever is your ethnic background first,
Right.
taking advantage of America. That's what I wrote about in multiculturalism. People don't come, to change the host country. People have coming to the host country because they want to seek the same,
Protection.
comforts or the same merits, the same advantages that the host country has, which they have been, in a sense, deprived of for whatever reason. The academics might sit and talk, but the fact is, on the immediate now moment, I want to go and see Elvis. That's why I want to be in America, or I want to go to Nashville, or I want to have my fourth freedom or the fifth freedom, the freedom to drive. You talked about the suburbs. The suburbs would not have happened without the manufacturing base and what Eisenhower did by building the superhighways. It is Eisenhower's contribution, and again the cunning of history to move the army and to move the missiles. He needed the highways, but those highways became the arteries of American economy.
And I remember The Hunt for Red October, that movie, The Hunt for Red October. Sean Connery plays the Russian commander, and one of his lieutenants comes to him and says, "Is it true that in America, if you want to travel from one state to another state, you don't need papers or a permit?" And he looks at the lieutenant and he says, "Yes, that is right. In America, you do not need papers to go from one place to another." And that was the promise of America. That's why so many immigrants came to America, was because they were escaping totalitarian systems, and they wanted to come to America to be free. And ironically, now America, with Trump instituting all that social media, if you want to come to America now, you have to let them pry into your social media accounts for 3 years. So America has become the inverse of what it used to be. And now they're becoming a closed society, and they're becoming a repressive society with hate speech laws and all kinds of weird stuff that goes against the Bill of Rights. It goes against all the amendments. You name them all, they're going against them. Exactly. It's kind of like ironic, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I would say so. And I think that I'm still trying to make make out what's going on with these Epstein files. And I think, again, I find it suspicious. All these leaked things awful things about Trump. And he's the only one that's being named. And this is from his Department of Justice, which is supposedly redacting everything. And they have been. But
not very well, actually.
No, not very well. Not very well, right? And so we've seen pictures and great, interesting pictures of Woody Allen, lots of Bill Gates, Noam Chomsky. You mentioned people like these really, and of course, obviously Bill Clinton. But there's nothing being leaked about these awful things that you're hearing about Trump. So I'm wondering, is this the way? I've always said, how does the Trumpenstein project end? Is this the way it ends? They decide to take him out like this, and everybody that hates him is so happy that he's gone that they don't ask about all the other guys. Because what about all the other figures? This would take down the system if they did it right. Because that's the elite that's there. Apparently, all of them. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
Well, I just want to quickly say they kind of I think it's like a limited hangout thing. Or Judas Ghost thing, they throw a few to the wolves to be sacrificed, like Larry Summers, right? But all the rest are protected. They only throw a few to a few out there to be sacrificed, to be stoned by the crowd, but the rest will escape notice because this is widespread. It goes beyond just American politics. It goes like Prince Andrew. It goes into Europe. It goes into Ehud Barak and the Israeli intelligence. Also, right? I mean, this is worldwide, and remember that they found a passport of Epstein with a Saudi Arabian passport.
I want to bring Chris Graves in here because this is his third time trying to. Chris,
Hey,
are you there? Chris, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yay! Nice to see you, Chris. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, nice to see you guys too.
Got any questions?
Yeah, I'm just wondering. When it comes to the released documents, I know Donald Trump had a whole bunch that when it came to, him with Epstein and everything, but also Bill Clinton. I don't really see in the mainstream media anybody really talking about the Bill Clinton side of things. And when you see the photographs of Bill Clinton with all the different, female companions or whatever, no one's asking the questions like, hey, Hillary, like, Hillary, what?
His audio must have gone out or whatever. Yeah, I think that's. What do you think of that, Salim? Because that was my point. Is that this seems like it's directed at Trump specifically, and I don't doubt that he's in there some way, but there's so many others, and this is his Justice Department doing it. So why do they? It seems like they want this to come out. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my first thought is that the whole Epstein case and FAR's issue was a mutual assured destruction. And it seems to me that the people, that is the Congress, have lost control because Trump overplayed his hand, in the 24 election and also in the 1916 election, when he said that, he has nothing to do with Epstein. He had thrown Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago and so on and so forth, the Costa case and all of that details. And he was writing, so he comes back on the second time, and what was supposed to be that both sides are not going to, go after each other, Trump did. And so the counterattack was going to come, and how it was going to come, of course, could not be guessed at. I cannot guess at it, but it was sort of a mutual assured destruction. And now that it has come out, I think you might be pretty much on that issue, right? That the deep state, which is connected with the Democrats equally with the Republican, the deep state has had it. That is, the Democrat side of the deep state has had it, and so Trump will now be more and more exposed, either through the files itself, or, as you have just explained, the people will be so focused on why is this redaction and why Trump, who promised all of this thing, is now holding back, will become the issue that will drive the 2026 election in a manner which the Republicans will not be able, that is, Trump's people will not be able to control.
Absolutely. Chris, you're back. I'm sorry. It looked like you got cut off mid-sentence. What did you want to complete your point? Chris?
Yeah, I was just wondering, how Bill Clinton, what do you guys know, like, whatever, like, Hillary Clinton, like, claimed to, did she come to Bill's, like, side when it came to all the pictures of Bill with all these young ladies and everything?
Well, I just want to quickly point out that the marriage between Bill and Hillary Clinton was dynastic. It was a business arrangement. It was a political business arrangement. I don't think they've lived together as man and wife for decades. That's what I just want to. And so the only reason she ever clung to him was for her political aims, right? And that's all there is for it. And she will protect him, and the rest of the establishment will protect Clinton because he was their perfect little animal to bring in their neocon agenda through the neoliberal agenda. The third way, as Tony Blair was also the face of it in England, of bringing in the military-industrial complex and this whole pro-military outlook, rules-based order of the Western world was through these characters like that. So they'll protect them to the end because they can be controlled and they can be counted on, whereas Trump can't be. He's unpredictable. That's why they're trying to get rid of him again.
Yeah, but what about in the mainstream populace? Most folks don't know about, Bill Clinton's, with, his Don, like, help me out here.
Well, no, yeah, I mean,
Most folks don't know about like Bill Clinton's like masquerades with like younger women and all this stuff on like the Lolita Express and everything, and they all think that he probably cheated on Hillary with Monica Lewinsky, that type of stuff at a base level. But a lot of most folks don't know about the Lolita Express and that type of stuff.
I think they do, but I think what it is that it's really the right wing conservatives that usually bring up Clinton if they talk about Trump. But for most people, the left. The only reason the left is interested in the Epstein files, sudden interest, is because they want to get Trump. They have no interest other than that. They don't. I mean, the rest are all their heroes. Woody Allen, Bill Clinton, Noam Chomsky. I mean, it's Hollywood. Half of Hollywood, Oprah. People like that are all supposedly Jimmy Kimmel. All these people were supposedly on the list. So they don't have any interest in that coming out, whether it's Bill Clinton or anyone else. And the right is as typical. They're just they made the decision with Trump, doing again, I think part of the Trumpenstein project by not wanting to release it, which made him look guilty. But now I just find it incredible that his Justice Department is redacting everything, but then they're releasing these things that make him look awful, but nobody else. Go ahead, Sonny.
I would say, I mean, this left-right divide, the binary, if we stick to that, it is all artificial, but even if we stick to that, the modern right, that is the right that the Republicans at least seem to represent, had a ethical basis to it. That is the basis of family, church, and all of that you write about, Don, and that which has basically got dismantled or fragmented, and the right was motivated to bring that back somehow once again, and on the Epstein issue, it is ultimately a moral and ethical issue. The left have no moral and ethical plank to their ideology, to their politics. It is all utilitarian, and so this peculiar shift has now taken place. For the left, Epstein file has become the sort of instrument by which they expect, the hope, to bring Trump down. And it converges with the ethical issues that has been the driving factor of the right, whether it is MAGA or the classic right, that there is, in the American dream, there is an ethical foundation, and that is captured by, in the constitutional term, the Bill of Rights, the original text, as opposed to the left view of the Constitution, that it is simply a life tree, and so on and so forth. No, there are certain things that is unalterable, and if you want to alter it, you better have a supermajority, and they cannot get that supermajority. That was the genius of the founding father. That is the genius of the Constitution. That is the one which the rest of the world wants to understand and emulate, but it needs to have that cultural thing, and that is the fight that is taking place within the rest of the world, whether it is in China, in India, in all the big civilizational state, in Iran. It is not anti-Americanism. It is about America that is the ideal. So when Ayatollah Khomeini said America is the great Satan, he was pointing out, in that sense, to what America had done to Iran. I mean, it is not Iran that did anything to America. It was the Americans who had done it. As the Americans did it to Vietnam. And this is not the America that we want. We want to see. This is not the America that is the people. We don't want to have that America coming down our throat. So now the question is, that America, what is it? Is it the non-Irish America? That has been the taboo.
Yeah.
And so the non-Irish America's agenda, right from the moment when Brandeis was put in the Supreme Court, has been to nullify the constitutional genius of the American system. That would be my fundamental argument.
And I would say, ironically, that, we hear these talk of fifth columns. And, they started that in World War II. And they were trying to ensure that the German Bund, the America First Committee, the people that they were a fifth column in the United States working for Nazism, which is nonsense. Most of them just didn't want to have another European war. We also heard about fifth columnists during the 1950s for the Russians, for the Soviets, the Nazis. Ironically, this for probably 40 years at least, we have had what I think is arguably the most obvious fifth column America has ever had. And that would be the Zionists or whatever that are operating inside, because they are working. The German Bund wasn't working for the Nazis. The alleged fifth columns in the 50s, very few of them had any association with. They're not working for the Soviets. But the fifth column we have today, we have how many millions of, I don't know how many people are working for the interest of Israel, for another nation. We have a fifth column. That's the way I like to look at it. And I wish more Americans would see that, because it doesn't matter what country it is, but why do we have so many people? And you see it in Representative Randy Fine. The guy is in our Congress and he has that yarmulke stapled to his head. He won't take it off. But this guy is laughing and making fun of the bloodshed in Gaza, making fun of children and everything. Who does he represent? He's Ben Shapiro represent. Who does the other guy?
Don, I see it. I recognize it. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's obvious. And you had this guy Brian, I forget his last name. The other guy that wears his Israeli defense outfit, his military
Brian
uniform. Yeah, to our country. And just imagine, let's say in India, what if somebody in your parliament wore his Pakistani military outfit, or for any other country? Same thing. If somebody in England wore a French military outfit, I mean, it's unheard of. But in America, nobody says a word, and it's okay.
Well, Tucker has said it, and he is in the crosshair. I worry about Tucker greatly. And
yes,
Don, if I may just read something from my today's Substack, just a very short passage. I don't know if you all have caught that.
Sure.
Possibly you haven't, but if you have, just bear with me. And with that, Don, I would want to take a leave. Is that okay with you, or you?
Yes, we're just about ready to go. So read that, and then anything else you want to say, give out any links or whatever.
What I want to say is, Truman confided in his diary something that goes completely against what he did subsequently, and this has to be explained, and this will need another Substack essay. What he confided in his personal diary that was discovered in 2003 by an accident in 1947, July 1947, was the following note that he wrote to himself. He was very upset and very agitated with what was happening around him on the issue of the Jews. And he was being bothered by people who were calling him excessively from that non-Irish group. And this is what he writes in his diary. The Jews have no sense of proportion, nor do they have any judgment on world affairs. The Jews, I find, are very, very selfish. They care not how many Estonians, Latvians, Finns, Poles, Yugoslavs, or Greeks get murdered or mistreated as displaced persons, as long as the Jews get special treatment. Yet when they have power, physical, financial, or political, neither Hitler nor Stalin has anything on them for cruelty or mistreatment to the underdog. Just think about that, what he wrote.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and just think about the sentence he wrote. Neither Hitler nor Stalin has anything on them for cruelty or mistreatment to the underdog. Now tell me, this is the man who then went against the advice of all his senior cabinet members, especially George C. Marshall, his Secretary of State, who told Truman that if he is going to go in the direction that Truman was asking for the consensus, the vote for Israel in the United Nations General Assembly in 1948, will they stand with him? And George C. Marshall said, I hope it doesn't come to that, Mr. President, because if that comes to that, I will be voting against the Democrat nominee in the 1948 election. That would be Truman. How did this happen? A man who confides to his personal diary what I've just read out to you, and what happened. And ever since then, what you are talking about, Don, becomes gradually, incrementally a beast.
Absolutely, absolutely. Salim, give out any links you need to. You want to give out the link for your Substack or whatever? You're a great guest, obviously. Love talking to you. I can listen to you. And if you didn't get enough of Salim, you want more Salim Mensur tonight at 9 p.m. on RB Ham's Beyond the Pale Rumble channel. And if you go to his social media, he's got the links there for you, I'm sure. Go ahead, Salim. Any other links you want to give out?
Well, I mean, the Substack link is there, Salim at whatever it is. I don't have it in my head right now.
I should probably have it. It's Salim Mensur at Substack. If you search for that, you'll find it.
Yeah, .com. And I am on Facebook. Everywhere else I have been deplatformed, and I possibly will get deplatformed in Facebook too. It is coming. So I cannot anymore write for the American Thinker. I don't write anymore for Gatestone Institute. They won't publish me because I am now the ogre, the anti-Semite.
It speaks well of you. That means you're telling the truth, which you obviously are. So again, thanks so much. We've gone over, and I like I said, I could talk forever. Thanks, Chris Grays. RB, thanks for coming on, and listen to his show tonight. You can get more Salim Mensur. Salim, I'm always honored to talk to you, sir.
I am.
Thank you so much. Your profile and courage. Thanks everybody for listening to Night Protests. Talk to you next week, same time.
Thank you.
Take it easy, man.